The paper in front of me is thicker than I expected, heavier somehow than a document that size should be. The notary's office on Wellington Street smells like old carpet and fresh coffee, and the woman across the desk has kind eyes that keep checking my face the way people do when they are not sure if you are about to cry or about to walk out. I am not going to do either. I have already made my decision. My phone has been turned face down in my coat pocket since I got in the car this morning. 31 missed calls. 31, all from the same number. My daughter. I have not answered a single one. She does not know what I am about to sign. 3 weeks ago, I would not have believed any of this was possible. 3 weeks ago, I was standing in the spare bedroom of my house in Guelph, ironing the blouse I had bought specifically for her wedding, telling myself that today was going to be the kind of day I would want to remember. I pressed every wrinkle out of that pale blue silk with the kind of care you give to something fragile. I told myself I was ready. I was not ready. My daughter had been distant for the better part of a year. I had told myself it was the stress of planning a wedding, the pressure of combining two families, the particular exhaustion that comes when someone else's mother has opinions about the centerpieces and the caterer and the seating chart. I told myself she was overwhelmed. I told myself I understood. The drive to the venue took me past the lake, which was flat and silver that Saturday morning, the October light sitting low over the water. I remember thinking it looked like something off a calendar. I had a card in my purse with a check inside, $4,000 I had put aside from my pension over 8 months. It was not a grand gesture. It was everything I could quietly manage. I planned to give it to her during a quiet moment between the ceremony and the reception, just the two of us, the way we used to find quiet moments when she was small. The venue was a converted heritage barn outside of Elora. Gorgeous, genuinely gorgeous, the kind of place that costs more per hour than I make in a week. Her fiancé's family had arranged it. His mother, a woman from Oakville who wore her wealth the way some people wear perfume, had been the one coordinating most of it. I had been included in exactly 2 emails over the past 6 months. Both were informational. Neither asked for my opinion. I found my seat. 3rd row, slightly to the left, not the front row. I noticed, but I told myself it was nothing. The ceremony was lovely. My daughter floated down the aisle in a dress she had chosen without me, and she was so beautiful, it made my throat close up. I pressed my fingers together in my lap and breathed through it. Her new husband looked at her like she was the only person in the room. I thought in that moment that I had been wrong to worry, that everything would be fine. The reception is harder to describe because some parts of it are very clear and some parts feel like they happened behind glass. I remember standing near the back of the room while his family took photographs. I remember looking for a moment to approach her and finding that there was always someone between us, his aunt, his cousins, the wedding coordinator with a clipboard, her new mother-in-law, who moved through that room like she had rehearsed it, touching my daughter's elbow, steering her gently but firmly away from wherever I happened to be standing. I told myself to be patient. I found a glass of sparkling water and stood near a window and watched my daughter laugh at something his uncle said, and I thought, she is happy. That is enough. That is what you came for. And then she was in front of me. She appeared at my side between one breath and the next, and her expression was not the expression of someone coming to say hello. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were doing that thing they do when she has already decided something. Mom, her voice was quiet, which made it worse. I need to ask you something. I smiled. I think I even touched her arm. Of course, sweetheart, you look absolutely. Can you find somewhere else to be for a while? I stopped. The photographer is doing the family portraits now, and it's... She paused, glanced sideways. His family has a whole vision for these shots, and having extra people in the background is throwing things off. Extra people. I'm your mother, I said. I said it quietly. I was not trying to make a scene. I know. She lowered her voice even further. But today is complicated and I need you to just give us some space. Please, we can talk later. Later, that word again, the same later she had been offering me for 18 months. Later, we'll have you over for dinner. Later, we'll tell you what the plan is. Later, Mom, not now. I looked at her for a long moment. I looked at the woman she had become, the one standing in front of me in an expensive dress, asking me to disappear from her wedding photographs because I was extra. All right, I said. I found my coat. I sat in my car in the gravel lot for 11 minutes. I watched the clock, and then I drove home. I did not give her the check. She called the next morning at 20 past 8. I was in the kitchen making oatmeal, still in my housecoat, still feeling the particular heaviness that comes from a night of not really sleeping. I looked at her name on the screen and I answered because I was her mother and some reflex in me still hoped she was calling to say she was sorry. Mom, hi. Her voice was bright, deliberately bright. The voice she uses when she wants something and has decided to pretend nothing happened. Did you make it home okay last night? I did, I said. Good, good. Listen, I was actually calling because we wanted to talk to you about something kind of exciting. I put down my spoon. She explained it quickly, the way people explain things they know you might resist. Her husband had a business idea. His brother, the one who lived in Calgary, the one who flipped properties, had been looking for land to develop in southern Ontario. Boutique short-term rental properties, eco-cabins she called them, very popular with Toronto weekenders. And my property, she said, my 42 acres outside of Fergus that had been in my family since my parents came over from Scotland in 1971, was apparently exactly what they were looking for. It's just sitting there, Mom, she said. You're not doing anything with it. I have a vegetable garden on that land. I have my late husband's workshop. I have 42 acres of mixed forest and old fence rows where I have walked every morning for 23 years. I have his ashes scattered along the creek at the back of the property in the spot he always said was his favorite place on earth. It is not just sitting there, I said. Okay, but practically speaking. No. Silence. Mom, don't be like this. This could actually set you up really well. They are talking about a very fair buyout, and there is a gorgeous retirement community in Guelph, right near us, actually. It would be so much easier for everyone if you were closer. Easier for everyone. A retirement community. I was 63 years old. I grew up on that land. My parents are buried in the church cemetery 2 kilometers from the front gate. I am not selling, I said, and I am not moving. Her tone shifted. Not immediately, but I heard it happen, a degree or two of warmth draining out. We already told them you'd hear them out. His brother is coming in from Calgary next week. It would just be a conversation. You told them I would hear them out without asking me. We thought you'd be reasonable about it. Reasonable? I ended the call. The messages started within the hour. Some were from her, some from her husband, and one, which surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have, was a voicemail from his brother that I did not ask for and did not consent to receive. He had a smooth voice, the kind that has been trained in boardrooms. He said he understood I might have hesitations. He said the market was excellent right now. He said they had already had preliminary conversations with the planning consultant, and things looked very promising. He said he hoped we could find a solution that worked for everyone. He said the word opportunity 4 times in 90 seconds. I played the message twice, standing in my kitchen, and then I walked outside and stood in the cold air of my own yard and looked at the trees my father had planted, and I thought, they have already told people this is happening. The next few days were strange. My daughter called repeatedly, alternating between reasonable and impatient, sometimes within the same conversation. Her husband sent a text that managed to be simultaneously polite and threatening, something about making sure that any legal arrangements around the property were squared away before year-end for tax purposes. I did not respond. On the third day, I drove out to the property. I do this a few times a week regardless. I have a key to the gate, and I walk the trails, and I check on the old workshop, and sometimes I sit by the creek where my husband is and I talk to him a little. It helps. It has always helped. That afternoon, I found a corner of the back fence line had been disturbed. Not dramatically, not obviously, but I knew that fence the way you know a face you have looked at every day. 3 posts on the northern edge had been loosened from the soil, and the wire between them had been folded back and then replaced, carefully, but not carefully enough. Someone had been walking the property without permission. There were tire tracks on the soft ground just beyond the fence. I stood there for a long time. The maples were turning, orange and gold against a flat gray sky. I could hear the creek. I could hear nothing else, and something settled in me that was quieter and colder and more certain than anger. I drove home and I called Miriam. Miriam has been my solicitor since before my husband died. She is 71. She drinks too much coffee, and she does not waste words. When I told her everything, beginning with the wedding and ending with the tire tracks, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You want to protect the land," she said. "Permanently," I said. "There is a way to do that," she said. "A conservation easement through the Ontario Heritage Trust. You donate the development rights to the land. You retain ownership and use, but no one, not a buyer, not an heir, not a creditor, not a developer, can ever build on it. It is registered on title. It follows the land forever." Forever. That word sat in the room with me like a presence. "There's something else," Miriam said. Her voice shifted slightly. "Do you remember signing anything along these lines before? Maybe around the time your husband's estate was settled?" I thought. "He mentioned wanting to protect it. We talked about it." "Can you look in his files? I think there may be something you have forgotten about." I found it that evening in the bottom drawer of his desk, inside a folder labeled simply "The Land." It was a letter from a land trust organization dated 14 years earlier, with a draft agreement attached and a note in his handwriting at the top. He had written, "We should do this. Let's not wait." And below that, in my own handwriting, a signature on the draft, not the final document, a draft, but evidence, Miriam said when I brought it to her the next morning, of long-standing and clearly expressed intention. "This is useful," she said. "If anyone tries to challenge the easement later, this shows the two of you had this conversation decades ago. This was not a reaction. This was always the plan." I looked at my husband's handwriting and I thought, yes, it was always the plan. We just ran out of time to finish it. It took 5 days to prepare the documents. Miriam worked quickly. I signed the conservation easement on a Wednesday afternoon in the notary's office on Wellington Street, in the smell of old carpet and fresh coffee, with 31 missed calls from my daughter sitting silent in my coat pocket. When the notary slid the final page toward me and I signed my name for the last time, something left my body that had been living in my chest for 3 weeks. Not grief exactly. More like the end of something that had been held too tight. "One more thing," I said to Miriam. She looked at me. "I want to call her now, from here." She nodded. She did not try to talk me out of it. I dialed. It rang twice. "Mom." My daughter's voice came through the line like something stretched to its limit, tight and desperate. "Mom, thank God. Where have you been? You need to hear what's happening." I did not speak yet. I let her go. She said her husband's brother was in serious trouble. An investor who had been backing multiple projects had pulled out after allegations of inflated appraisals came forward. There were other names involved. There was talk of a provincial investigation, the Eco Cabin project. Our project, she called it, which struck me, had been one of the properties the investors were counting on. Without it, the whole thing collapsed, and the brother was saying that she and her husband had represented the land as available, that they had misled people, that the consequences of that were now falling on them. "He's furious, Mom," she said. Her voice was cracking. "My husband is furious. He said I should have secured this months ago. He said I promised him you would go along with it, and now everything is falling apart because of me, because I couldn't manage my own mother." I kept very still. "Please," she said, "please just call the lawyer and tell them you've changed your mind. We can still fix this. You can fix this." "I can't fix it," I said, "and I couldn't, even if I wanted to." "What does that mean?" "The land is in a conservation easement," I said. "It was registered 3 hours ago. The development rights are permanently extinguished. No one can build on it. Not a developer, not your husband's brother, not you, not me. It's done." The silence that followed was the longest I can remember. "You," her voice broke into something small. "You did that on purpose. You knew we needed it." "I did it because it was always meant to be protected," I said. "I did it because your father wanted it. I did it because it is the right thing for that land. I am sorry that this has caused you difficulty, but this is the consequence of what your husband's family was doing, and I think you knew some of what they were doing." She made a sound I cannot describe, not crying exactly, something more fractured than crying. "He told me this morning," she said very quietly, "that the whole point of this was to get the land transferred before we filed taxes jointly this year. He said once it was in the company, he was going to refinance everything off it." She stopped. "He said the plan was never to stay in Ontario." I closed my eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't think he married me for me." The truth of that had been visible from the outside for longer than I wanted to admit. A man who had isolated her from her friends over the past year, who had slowly redirected her loyalty, who had used her to approach me when his own approach was not working. I had seen it, and I had told myself I was wrong. "I know," I said. "I am so sorry." "What do I do?" "You speak to a lawyer," I said. "Not mine. Your own. You find out exactly where you stand. You do not sign anything he puts in front of you." "Mom, I cannot fix this for you," I said, "but I will not abandon you in it." She wept then, properly the way she used to when she was a child and the thing that had hurt her was finally allowed to come out. I stayed on the line. I did not say much. Sometimes the only thing you can offer someone is the sound of not having hung up. I drove home in the early dark, the highway lights coming on in long orange rows over the 401. The fields on either side were flat and harvested, the stubble pale under the first hard frost. I thought about my husband. I thought about the note in his handwriting. I thought about how he always said that the land would outlast all of us, and that was precisely the point. In the months that followed, the investigation expanded. The brother's name appeared in a Financial Post article that I read once and did not look up again. Her husband moved out of their apartment in February. She called me from a parking lot in the middle of a Tuesday to tell me, her voice steady in the particular way of someone who has cried everything out and is now just reporting facts. I listened. I drove up to see her the following weekend. We sat at her kitchen table and drank tea and did not talk about the land or the wedding or any of it. Not yet. There was time. The conservation easement was formally celebrated in the small ceremony the following spring, when the Heritage Trust put up a small sign at the front gate acknowledging the property's protected status. A woman from the organization told me that the creek corridor alone was significant habitat for several species at risk. She said the land had been waiting for this designation. I thought about that. The idea that something can spend decades waiting for the protection it was always supposed to have. I planted garlic in the garden that autumn. the same variety my mother grew. Small, deliberate, unglamorous. Things that take time and cold and dark before they come back up. I have learned to be patient with the things worth keeping, and I have learned more slowly, more painfully, that love does not ask you to disappear so that someone else's photograph looks cleaner. Love does not put you in the third row and call you extra. Love does not show up at your property line with a hired surveyor before you have agreed to anything. The land is protected now. My husband's ashes are still by the creek. The maples have turned and come back twice since all of this happened. Some things hold. I keep going back to that note in my husband's handwriting. We should do this. Let's not wait. He wrote that 14 years before any of this happened. Before the wedding. Before the phone calls. Before the tire tracks in the soft ground by the back fence. He saw something clearly that I had only felt, that some things are too important to leave unprotected, and that waiting for the right moment is often just another way of letting time make the decision for you. I did not act wisely in the early years. I gave in when my daughter pushed. I told myself that generosity meant not having limits. I confused keeping the peace with keeping the relationship, and for a long time I could not tell the difference. What I know now is that there is nothing generous about letting someone take from you what was never theirs to take. Real generosity requires that you first understand what you actually have and what it cost and who built it before you arrived. The land cost my parents 30 years of careful living after they came over from Scotland. It cost my husband his weekends and his knees and eventually his breath, out there in the cold mending fences and clearing deadfall. It cost me 23 years of walking the same trails alone after he died, learning to carry grief the way the land carries winter, quietly, without asking anyone's permission to survive it. When my daughter called it just sitting there, she was not describing the land. She was describing how much of that history she had chosen not to see. I do not blame her entirely. She had been guided by someone who was very good at helping people unsee things. That is its own kind of damage, and she is working through it. But I also know that the choices she made were hers. She is the one who put me in the third row. She is the one who called the next morning as though nothing had happened. She is the one who told people the land was available before she had asked me. Those were her decisions, and the consequences that followed were the natural result of them. That is not cruelty. That is just how things work. What carried me through was not anger, though there was anger. It was something quieter, the ability to sit with what was happening, look at it clearly, and decide what mattered more than my own discomfort. It would have been easier to hand over the documents. It would have been easier to avoid the conflict, to tell myself she needed me, to confuse her need with love. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is just the decision to stay in your own chair, look the notary in the eye, and sign your name. I planted garlic that autumn. Same variety my mother grew. It will not come up until spring. That is the nature of it. Some things worth having require you to act before you can see the result. The integrity to know what is right, the clarity to understand what is actually happening around you, and the will to do something about it even when it costs you. Those three things together are what gets a person through. Not perfectly, not without grief, but through. My daughter sent a text last week, short. She said the leaves were turning and she thought of the property. I read it twice and then I put the phone down and looked out the window for a while. That is where we are. Not resolved, not finished, just at the beginning of something that might, with time and honesty on both sides, become something worth keeping. The land is protected. The creek is still there, and I have learned, maybe later than I should have, that the most important thing you can preserve is not always something you can see on a title deed.